She demanded a land survey to expose me, but the results exposed her, and half her house became mine overnight. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, marched toward my porch with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Your fence is 3 inches on my side," she snapped. I looked at the old fence posts, weathered, leaning, and definitely not placed by me. "Karen, this fence is older than both of us living here." She didn't care. She'd been looking for a reason to start a fight ever since she became HOA president. "I've already filed an official complaint," she said proudly. "And I've demanded a full land survey." I only shrugged. "Go ahead." She smirked, assuming she'd won. But she had no idea she just triggered her own downfall. The surveyor arrived on a scorching Friday morning, the kind where the sun burned straight through your shirt and the air shimmered above the pavement. His truck rumbled to a stop in front of my driveway, a faded county emblem peeling on the side door. He stepped out, adjusting his cap, a long metal tape measure in one hand and a folder of documents tucked under his arm. His expression was neutral, too neutral, like a man who had been warned to expect trouble but had promised himself he'd stay professional. Karen practically materialized out of nowhere the moment his boots hit the ground. She marched toward him with the eagerness of someone about to win a lifelong battle. "About time," she snapped. "I've been waiting for this. I hope you're ready to work. We need to check every inch, every corner, every fence post. He's been stealing land for years." She jabbed a finger in my direction as if she were pointing out a criminal. The surveyor glanced at me, then at her, then back at his folder, as if silently wondering what he had done to deserve this job today. I simply folded my arms and leaned against my porch railing. I'd learned long ago that arguing with Karen was like yelling at a tornado, pointless, exhausting, and guaranteed to end with something broken. "Ma'am," the surveyor said, maintaining that calm county official politeness, "I'll need space to work. Land surveys require precision. I can't rush or skip steps." Of course," Karen said, waving her hand dramatically. "Just start with the back fence. I'm telling you, he moved it 3 feet inward when I wasn't home. That's why my flower bed floods. He's redirecting water onto my property." I resisted the urge to laugh. My flower bed flooding. She had 3 layers of concrete edging. Nothing short of a tsunami would flood it, but the surveyor didn't respond. He simply walked toward the backyard, pulling out stakes and equipment. Karen trailed behind him so closely she was practically stepping on his heels. He paused. She paused. He moved left. She moved left. He crouched. She crouched. If he had started crawling, she would have been right there, whispering complaints into his ear. The surveyor began examining the boundary markers. Old, rusted rebar stakes driven into the earth decades ago, topped with faded red caps. He brushed dirt away carefully, comparing the markers to the measurements on his old paper maps. Every time he stopped to think, Karen jumped in. "See, that's wrong, isn't it? Tell him it's wrong. Tell him he has to move his fence. I've told the HOA for years. No one listens until I make them listen." The surveyor didn't answer. Instead, he double-checked the distance between 2 points, his brows tightening more and more with each measurement, like someone slowly realizing a puzzle piece doesn't fit. I watched quietly from the shade, sipping iced tea, pretending not to notice Karen glaring daggers at me every 30 seconds. The surveyor moved to the side yard next, dragging his gear across the grass. He knelt again, took out a compass tool, and measured angles with meticulous care. Then he pulled out a massive property map, the kind printed on thick yellowing paper from the county archives. "This map is over 40 years old," he murmured, "before the HOA existed." "Exactly," Karen burst out. "So everything on it is wrong, things changed, he's taken advantage, he thinks no one will notice because everyone else is scared of confrontation." The surveyor squinted at the map, then at the land, then at the fence. His frown deepened. "Huh." That little sound sent Karen into a frenzy. What did you find? Is he trespassing? Is it illegal? Tell me what's wrong with his fence." He ignored her, stepping toward the front corner of the property. He placed a stake, pulled his tape measure to another marker, and then stopped abruptly. He checked the number again, and again, then again. Sweat dripped down his temples, not just from the heat, but from the growing tension radiating off Karen's frantic energy. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath. "What doesn't make sense?" Karen demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he made his way back to his truck, pulled out a digital tablet, and compared the old maps to updated satellite boundary overlays from the county. He zoomed in, zoomed out, pinched the screen, frowned, then wiped sweat from his forehead before squinting again. "This can't be right," he whispered. "Oh, it's right," Karen said confidently. "I told you, I've been telling everyone." Surveyor glanced at her with the expression of a man who regretted leaving his house that morning. Then he walked back to the backyard and remeasured the fence line. 3 times. I could see the moment realization hit him. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw set. His eyes widened just a fraction, but enough to show he had stumbled upon something significant. Karen saw it too. She leaned forward eagerly. "You found something, didn't you? I knew it. I knew it." "What did he take? A foot? 2 feet? A yard?" "How much is he encroaching?" The surveyor slowly packed up his tools, his face unreadable now. That neutrality he had walked in with had turned into something heavier, something cautious. When he finally approached us, he kept his voice low, almost respectful. "I need to confirm something at the county office," he said. "I'll return once I've verified a few details." Karen's jaw dropped open like he'd slapped her. "What do you mean confirm? You said this would be simple, just a measurement, a quick check. Why are you making this complicated?" "It was simple," he replied, his tone measured. "That's why it's concerning." Karen's face twisted in confusion. "What does that mean?" He didn't elaborate. He simply nodded politely, walked to his truck, and drove off, leaving a dust trail behind him. Karen stared after him, stunned and furious, muttering to herself. I stood there on the porch, arms still crossed, a slow smile spreading across my face. Whatever he found, it wasn't what Karen expected. And something told me this was only the beginning. 2 days later, long after the dust had settled from the heated backyard inspection, and Karen had finished ranting to anyone in the HOA who would listen, the surveyor made his quiet drive to the county records office. The old brick building sat on the corner of Main Street, the kind of place where time seemed to travel slower, and everything smelled faintly of paper, dust, and old ink. The clerk at the front desk, a woman in her 60s with bifocals and a permanent expression of bureaucratic exhaustion, looked up as he approached with his hat in his hands and his file under his arm. "Morning," he greeted politely. "I'm here for archival parcel maps, specifically the original subdivision plans from the 1970s. The clerk sighed, pushed aside a stack of forms, and motioned toward a back room lined with steel drawers and cabinets older than both of them combined. "You surveyors only show up for 2 reasons, she muttered as she walked. "Either something's been built wrong or someone wants to fight their neighbor." The surveyor offered a wry smile. "A bit of both, I think," she nodded knowingly. "Figures." She unlocked a heavy drawer with a creak that echoed through the quiet room. Inside were rolled maps, yellowed and fragile, each labeled with dates long before the HOA ever existed. She pulled out a thick roll and set it on the table. "Subdivision 14B established 1976. If there's a boundary problem, it'll be in here." The surveyor unrolled the map slowly, flattening the brittle edges with metal weights. It was an intricate layout of parcels, hand-drawn with care, every lot a square or rectangle, labeled, measured, and stamped with old county approval seals long retired. He traced his fingers over the northern parcels, the ones closest to the wooded area behind our properties. His gaze sharpened when he found my lot, then Karen's. There were markings he hadn't seen on the digital versions, notes scribbled in blue ink, lines slightly adjusted, and a specific annotation that made him lean closer. "What's this?" he murmured. "Oh," the clerk said, adjusting her glasses and squinting. "That's a construction note. Back then, some owners built add-ons or sheds before the final surveyor came through. If there was an encroachment, it got noted but wasn't always corrected." The surveyor's pulse quickened. He found the note again, clearer this time, a brief message tucked beside the boundary line between my lot and Karen's. "Northern parcel includes secondary structure built partially across lot boundary." He read it again and again. The clerk tapped the paper. "Means whoever owned that lot, number 32, built something too close to or over the boundary. Common issue back then. People got creative. Secondary structure. Northern Parcel, Lot 32. He flipped pages in his folder confirming lot numbers. Karen's house, Lot 32, sat on the northern parcel. His breath hitched. "Is it the structure I'm thinking of?" he asked. "The garage, the side extension," the clerk shrugged. "If it's part of the house now, it was once considered an add-on. People loved to expand without permits back then." He snapped photos, took notes, cross-checked measurements. If the note was correct, and it appeared painfully correct, then part of Karen's house wasn't on her land at all. It jutted into mine. He compared boundary lines one more time, pulling up the data from his digital survey. Everything matched, but that wasn't the part that bothered him. What bothered him was the discovery that the extension, the very place Karen had been bragging about for years as her sunroom sanctuary, was technically resting on MY land. Not inches, not a tiny sliver. A significant chunk, enough to matter, enough to cause legal chaos, enough to completely flip the battle Karen had been trying to start. He closed the map carefully, rolled it up, and handed it back with shaking hands. "I need copies of everything," he said. The clerk nodded, already moving toward the copier. "Always the quiet neighborhoods," she muttered under her breath. "Always the ones with HOAs." 20 minutes later, he stepped out of the county office into the afternoon heat, gripping the documents like they were a lit fuse. He didn't call Karen first, not even close. Instead, he dialed my number. I answered on the second ring. "Hello," the surveyor exhaled slowly, like someone delivering news they knew would shift the ground beneath a person's feet. "Sir," he began, voice low and steady, "you might want to sit down." My fingers tightened around the phone. "For what?" There was a pause, long enough for the cicadas buzzing outside to fill the silence. "It's about the boundary," he said, "and Karen's house." My heartbeat slowed, then sped up. "What about it?" Another pause, a careful one. "You're going to want to hear this in person." Karen had been packing her front lawn all morning, an unstoppable whirlwind of energy and bravado. She had called a neighborhood meeting, without warning, a self-declared announcement of victory that had drawn curious neighbors from both sides of the street. Folding chairs were dragged out onto the driveway, iced tea and lemonades placed haphazardly on the hood of her SUV, and everyone whispered excitedly, speculating what this latest HOA drama could possibly entail. "Today," Karen began, raising her hands like a conductor preparing an orchestra, "we finally have the results. We expose dishonesty. We will see justice done." Her voice was loud, commanding attention, a mixture of triumph and anticipation. I stayed on the porch, arms folded, drinking my coffee, letting the neighbors' reactions fill the silence around me. Karen had practically rehearsed this scene in her head for months, envisioning a dramatic reveal in which I was caught red-handed, embarrassed, and humiliated before the entire street. Instead, she had underestimated one key variable: the surveyor. He arrived quietly, folder in hand, his usual calm, professional demeanor a stark contrast to Karen's theatrics. He laid the folder carefully on the hood of her SUV and began sorting through the documents, maps, and notes he had painstakingly compiled. Karen leaned in, barely able to contain her excitement. "So what do they say, huh? Tell us finally, tell us I'm right." She practically bounced on her heels, gesturing at the assembled neighbors as though her performance alone had secured their attention. The surveyor looked at her, and for a moment there was nothing but neutral professionalism on his face. Then he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Karen," he said, voice measured, calm, almost hypnotically steady, "according to these county records and my recent survey," he paused, letting the words settle like a slow fog over the driveway. "Nearly half of your house is built on Mr. Adams' land." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Karen froze mid-gesture, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What?" she squeaked, high-pitched, unsteady. The neighbors blinked, exchanged glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Did he say what I think he said?" "Wait, you mean Karen's house?" "On Adams' land." The surveyor repeated himself slowly, articulating each word with deliberate care, as if speaking too fast might undo the revelation. "You built across the boundary. Your living room, garage, and part of your bedroom sit on his property." The crowd murmured, gasps rippling through the neighbors, some stepping back instinctively as if they'd just witnessed a car crash. Corinne's face, once a vivid crimson of superiority and triumph, drained to a pale, almost ghostly shade. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her hands trembled slightly as they hung at her sides. She looked at me, eyes wide, pleading, searching for any sign of argument that might salvage her dignity, only to find calm amusement instead. I remained silent. The surveyor pulled out one of the maps and laid it flat, the boundary lines clearly marked, the measurements annotated in precise detail. "See here," he said, pointing at the corner of the northern parcel. The neighbors leaned in collectively, peering at the paper. "This dashed line marks the true property boundary. This shaded area," he continued, his finger tracing along the portion of her house jutting into my land, "is what sits on Mr. Adams' property." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Some covered their mouths, others whispered to neighbors, comparing it to the familiar outline of Corinne's home. "It can't be," Corinne stammered. "I've lived here 20 years. My house has always been exactly where it is." The surveyor shook his head politely, professionalism intact. "The original subdivision maps and the county survey indicate otherwise. These were overlooked during prior checks, but the physical measurements and historical documents match perfectly. Your home encroaches significantly onto Mr. Adams' property." Corinne's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "This must be wrong. It's a mistake. I demand a recount, a review, a redo. How could this happen?" A neighbor whispered almost to themselves. "Seems like karma finally caught up." Corinne spun toward the neighbors, her fury barely contained. "Are you all seeing this?" she demanded, voice cracking. "Do you understand what this means? This proves he's dishonest." But the whispers had shifted in tone, no longer supporting Corinne but marveling at the irony. The HOA queen who had bullied and scolded every resident for decades now faced the unthinkable, her own miscalculation exposed to everyone. I stepped off the porch, hands in pockets, letting the scene unfold naturally. Corinne's confident posture, her chest puffed out like a peacock, had collapsed. Her knees locked, her shoulders slumping as if the very ground had shifted beneath her feet. She opened her mouth again, but the surveyor, maintaining control of the narrative, continued. "The encroachment is not trivial. It covers nearly 50% of your main structure. Resolution will require legal review, property adjustment, and possibly compensation. I recommend addressing this matter with Mr. Adam directly or through the proper legal channels." The neighborhood absorbed every word. Eyes flicked between Corinne and me, some stifling chuckles, others whispering theories. "He's going to have to take it down," one neighbor muttered. Another added, "Maybe now she'll learn to leave people's property alone." Corinne's hands flew to her face, trembling, her mascara streaking under the strain of disbelief and anger. This is impossible," she said, voice breaking, her composure shattered. The surveyor rolled up the map, calm, meticulous, and handed it to me. "I'll provide copies for both parties," he said. "This is the official record. It cannot be disputed without legal proceedings, but it reflects the situation accurately." Corinne sank to the edge of her folding chair, staring at nothing, the realization of her defeat hitting her like a cold wave. Her self-assured victory had evaporated entirely, replaced by embarrassment, shock, and rage simmering just below the surface. The neighborhood remained silent for a moment, processing the scene. Then slowly, whispers grew into cautious conversations. "Well, didn't see that coming." "That's ironic." "Finally, justice." I stood calmly, arms crossed, letting Corinne sit there, powerless for once, the crown of HOA authority slipping irreversibly from her grasp. It was a moment long awaited, and the results, official and undeniable, had finally tipped the scales. Within a week, the quiet hum of my neighborhood was punctuated by the arrival of official-looking letters, their thick envelopes and embossed county seals signaling that bureaucracy had taken hold. The first batch landed in Corinne's mailbox, not mine, and she was the one who had been predicting scandal and victory just days earlier. The first envelope she tore open revealed a county-issued notice stamped with red ink, "Unlawful construction across property lines." She blinked at the words, her fingers trembling slightly as she reread the sentence. The paper detailed the exact encroachment, listing measurements down to the inch, referencing both the historic surveys and the newly verified measurements conducted by the county surveyor. A second envelope arrived the next day. This one bore heavier legal weight: liability for encroachment. It outlined potential consequences, including fines, required permits, and the obligation to rectify any unauthorized construction. Corinne's hand shook as she read it, her eyes darting across the typed paragraphs filled with legal jargon, the reality of the situation sinking in like cold water. The third letter was the most damning of all. It explicitly stated my rights as the neighboring property owner. Right of neighboring owner to claim compensation or demand removal of encroaching structures. Corinne slammed the stack of letters onto her kitchen counter, rattling the teacups that had not yet dried from a recent wash. This can't be real," she muttered, packing back and forth. "They're making a mistake. It has to be wrong." The surveyor's maps and the county records had been thorough, and now the law had validated them. She had built nearly half of her home, including portions of the living room, garage, and a section of the bedroom on MY property, and the county was giving me explicit legal rights to enforce correction. Corinne's mind raced. She dialed neighbors' numbers, sent frantic texts, and even attempted to call the HOA, all with the same urgent tone. "They're coming for me. They're trying to take my house. It's illegal." But each call ended in frustration. Each explanation met with polite confusion or gentle laughter, as the reality of the documented encroachment slowly solidified in the minds of all who heard her. Mid-morning on the fourth day, she stormed across the yard to my house, her heels clacking against the pavement, arms flailing as if she could physically demand the situation to change. I was outside, trimming the rose bushes, sun high overhead, the scent of freshly cut leaves mixing with the warm air. She practically exploded onto the porch. "You can't do this. This is outrageous. We're neighbors. We're supposed to get along. You can't just use this as an excuse to." I held up a hand to halt her torrent of words, my tone calm, measured, entirely in contrast to her storm. "Corinne," I said gently yet firmly, "you demanded a land survey. I'm simply respecting the results." Her jaw dropped, incredulity written across her face. "Respecting the results? How is it respecting anything when they're going to take half my house away? This is insane. You're taking pleasure in this, aren't you?" I shook my head, still calm. "Not at all. I didn't call the county. I didn't alter the surveys. I simply followed protocol. You insisted on clarity, and now it's been clarified. There's no pleasure in paperwork, Corinne." Her face contorted with fury, the veins in her neck visibly pulsing. "This is harassment. You're harassing me. I've lived here for decades. I paid taxes. I did all the landscaping. This is mine." I nodded slowly, letting her voice pour over me like a storm she could not stop. "Yes, you built on your lot, and yes, you maintained it. But these letters, these measurements, and this survey, they make it clear that part of your house sits on land that isn't yours. It isn't about ownership of time, it's about ownership of land." She flung her hands into the air, a dramatic gesture worthy of a stage. "I can't believe this. You're my neighbor. Aren't neighbors supposed to help each other, not sue each other?" I smiled faintly, the edges of my lips tight with patience. "Corinne, I'm not suing anyone. The county sent the letters. I have every right to enforce my property rights if I choose, but I haven't done anything beyond waiting for the facts to speak. You wanted a survey. The survey gave the truth. That's all." Her breathing grew heavy, chest heaving, eyes wild as she backed down my porch steps, packing in small circles, muttering curses under her breath. You think you're clever, don't you? Waiting, smiling, pretending like you're calm while the law falls into your lap. I should call the HOA. They'll hear about this." I stayed silent, letting her fury expend itself naturally, while neighbors peered cautiously from windows and across fences, eyes wide at the spectacle. She stormed toward the street, then spun back around, fists clenched. "I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer. You haven't heard the last of me. This isn't over." I nodded, voice steady, calm as a mountain. "Of course it isn't over, it's just begun. But remember, Corinne, it's not about me. It's about property. It's about respecting boundaries. You chose to cross them. The law simply confirms what's already been measured." She stood there, stunned, fumbling with the letters in her hands, her once commanding presence reduced to disbelief, rage, and helplessness. I watched her storm away down the street, neighbors whispering behind curtains, and felt a quiet satisfaction that only comes from letting justice take its natural course. No shouting, no fighting, no unnecessary confrontation. Simply the facts, the law, and a lesson that even the most aggressive HOA tyrant could not bulldoze the truth when the land itself refused to be moved. Over the next few days, the envelopes remained scattered across her dining table, unopened, unsigned, and unavoidable reminders of her predicament. Corinne's angry complaints echoed faintly from the neighboring yards, but I stayed out of her reach, tending to my property and letting the inevitable process of rectification unfold. For the first time in decades, she had been forced to confront her own actions without influence, without theatrics, and without the power she so often wielded against others. And I realized, watching her storm from the curb for the third time that week, that sometimes simply respecting the truth was the most powerful response of all. The news of Corinne's encroachment had spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood, and within days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, citing urgent governance and compliance issues that needed immediate attention. The usual evening meeting room, normally calm and perfunctory, was buzzing with tension as board members shuffled papers, whispered urgently to one another, and glanced nervously at the clock, aware that the storm that was Corinne was about to hit the room with full force. Corinne arrived, as always, impeccably dressed, hair perfectly coiffed, her eyes bright with the certainty that she could dominate any room she entered. She carried herself with the practiced confidence of a queen who had ruled this HOA for years, and for a moment, as she surveyed the room, it seemed as though that aura might hold. The chairperson, a mild-mannered woman named Linda, cleared her throat and began the proceedings, reading the agenda aloud. Emergency compliance review regarding recent property disputes, encroachment notices, and allegations of mismanagement of HOA authority. Corinne immediately leaned forward, a smile plastered on her face, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, this is nothing, ladies and gentlemen," she interjected. "It's merely a technical error, some small misinterpretation of maps. Honestly, hardly worth discussing. Let's not turn a molehill into a mountain. I assure you, all will be resolved without any drama." Her tone was honeyed smooth, the kind of practiced charm she often used to sway neighbors during contentious meetings. But the treasurer, a sharp-eyed man named Philip who had long grown tired of Corinne's overreach, set his papers down deliberately, his expression hardening. "A technical error," he said, voice low but firm, cutting through her preamble. "You accused Mr. Adam of violating HOA rules repeatedly. You issued warnings, fines, and letters of complaint against him. And it turns out, according to official county documents, you are the one violating county laws. That is not a technical error. That is a legal encroachment. Your own home is built partially on his property." The room went silent for a moment, the words sinking in like ice water. Corinne blinked, momentarily caught off guard, her rehearsed smile flickering. She opened her mouth to respond, but another board member, Denise, leaned forward, her tone calm but cutting. "It gets worse, Corinne," she said. "Beyond the legal violation, your actions have demonstrated an abuse of power within this board. You repeatedly used your position to intimidate neighbors, to enforce rules selectively, and to manipulate outcomes in your favor. The trust we placed in you has been violated." Gasps echoed softly around the room. Some members whispered affirmations to one another, while others shook their heads in disbelief that the woman who had dictated HOA affairs for over a decade was now facing her own reckoning. Corinne's hand shot up defensively. No, that's not fair. I've done nothing wrong. You're misrepresenting everything. This is a misunderstanding. I demand evidence." Philip leaned back slightly, pushing his glasses up, voice deliberate and unwavering. "The evidence is in the county records, Corinne. And it's in your own history as HOA president. You were warned about potential boundary issues in the past and ignored them. You issued fines and citations to others without proper verification. Today, we hold you accountable for your actions. Your claim of a misunderstanding doesn't erase the facts." Corinne's face drained of color. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for anyone who might rescue her from the trap she had woven around herself. But the room was resolute. Members nodded to one another, eyes steady, expressions unreadable but firm. Linda, the chairperson, called for a vote, all in favor of removing Corinne from her position as HOA president. Hands shot up almost immediately. The vote was unanimous. Corinne's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock, but no sound came out. She opened and closed her mouth again, as if trying to formulate words that might reverse the inevitable. This is impossible. She finally screamed, her voice piercing, high-pitched, echoing across the hall, bouncing off the walls like a shriek in an empty canyon. Her perfect composure shattered entirely. Papers scattered from her hands, rolling across the polished floor. She lurched forward, attempting to grab at someone to plead to reclaim control, but the board members had already started the official removal procedures. "Corinne," Linda said gently but firmly, "your term as president is over, effective immediately. All official correspondence and authority must be handed over to the board secretary. Any future actions will be reviewed collectively, with full transparency." Corinne stumbled back, staring at the envelope of legal notices still clutched in one hand, the weight of her defeat sinking in. The room's tension hung thick, neighbors and board members silently watching as the once dominant figure of the HOA was reduced to a trembling, frantic woman, her voice rising in shrill indignation. "You can't do this to me. I built this community. I made rules. I'm the president," she shouted, almost incoherently, packing back and forth like a caged animal. Denise and Philip exchanged a glance, neither moving to intervene physically, allowing the process of accountability to unfold naturally. Corinne's tyranny, once unchecked for years, had been dismantled within minutes, her authority stripped away by both legal reality and the consensus of the board. Her scream reverberated through the hall, a sound of rage, shock, and humiliation, a fitting punctuation to the downfall she had orchestrated for herself. The other members continued the meeting without her, discussing next steps, ways to rectify past abuses, and strategies to ensure the HOA would operate transparently going forward. Corinne remained in the corner, hands over her face, sobbing softly now, no longer the domineering figure she had been. The board voted on interim leadership. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, and the word of Corinne's dethroning spread quietly through the streets like wildfire, confirming to everyone that even the most controlling neighbor could be held accountable when facts, law, and collective resolve aligned. By the time the meeting adjourned, Corinne had been completely removed from her position, her power evaporated, her reign concluded. Outside, neighbors whispered excitedly, some congratulating one another for surviving the ordeal, others marveling at the speed with which the once untouchable HOA queen had been dethroned. Corinne's screams faded into the distance, leaving a silence that was both shocking and profoundly satisfying, marking the beginning of a new era where fairness and the truth had finally reclaimed their place in the community. Corinne's descent into desperation was swift and dramatic, almost theatrical, as though every step she took was calculated to convince herself and everyone around her that she still had control. Fines had started arriving in the mail with alarming regularity, each one enumerating specific violations, penalties for encroachment, and deadlines that seemed impossibly short for a homeowner who had so confidently flaunted her authority for years. The first fine was like a warning shot, enough to rattle her composure. The second fine, arriving the following week, caused her to pace frantically through her living room, hands pressed to her temples, muttering curses at the paper, at the county, and at me, as if sheer volume of protest could reverse the legal reality. By the third notice, she realized that no amount of intimidation, posturing, or bluffing could undo the facts, and the panic began to surface in more desperate attempts to regain favor. First came the fake apologies. She appeared at my door one morning, wearing her most contrite expression, hands folded as though in prayer, bowing slightly as if she were delivering herself to the mercy of a judge rather than a neighbor. "Adam," she began, her voice soft and quivering, almost convincing, I want to apologize for all the misunderstandings, truly. Perhaps I overreacted. I didn't mean for things to escalate. Can we just put this behind us?" I regarded her quietly from the porch, letting her words settle into the silence. My eyes didn't soften. I did not speak. Months of harassment, petty complaints, repeated threats, and endless fines had prepared me for this exact moment. There would be no shortcuts, no placation, no appeasement. Her posture faltered slightly as she waited for a response that never came. Then came the baked goods: brownies, cookies, cupcakes, even loaves of banana bread, each one presented with a bright, hopeful smile, as though sugar could erase legal documents, county notices, and the months of mental strain she had inflicted. "I made these for you, Adam," she said cheerfully, placing a neatly wrapped box on my porch table. "Just a small token of goodwill. Surely we can come to some agreement." I picked up one of the brownies, examined it carefully, then placed it back without touching it, maintaining my composure. "Karen," I said quietly, "the county has issued their notices. This isn't about goodwill or favors. This is about property law, facts, and accountability. Your baked goods don't change that." Her smile faltered, cracking into disbelief, and the first sparks of panic began to flare in her eyes. Tears followed quickly, seemingly on cue, streaming down her cheeks as she dropped to one knee on my porch step. "Adam," she said, voice trembling and shaky, almost theatrical in its desperation, "please, can't we settle this quietly? I can make it worth your while. We don't have to involve lawyers. We don't have to drag this into court. I just want peace. I just want to fix this somehow." I studied her for a long moment, letting the tears, the trembling hands, and the frantic look in her eyes sink in. I had endured months of her harassment, her incessant complaints to the HOA, her threats to call inspectors over trivial matters, her repeated fines and petty legal maneuvers designed to intimidate me. This moment, her desperation, was the culmination of all that, and I would not be swayed. "Karen," I said, calm, steady, unflinching, "it's in the county's hands now. There's no negotiation to be made. The survey has been verified, the encroachment is clear. The law will decide next steps." Her face twisted, disbelief giving way to raw, incandescent rage. She banged her fists on the porch railing, her voice rising into a scream that echoed across the yard, cutting through the morning air. "You'll ruin me. I can't survive this. My house, my reputation, my authority. You'll destroy everything I've built." I took a step back, letting the words wash over me like a storm she had summoned herself. "No, Karen," I replied slowly, my voice cold, measured, and final. "You ruined yourself." The words struck her with the force of a hammer. Her knees buckled slightly as the weight of her own actions settled in, her hands falling limply to her sides. The neighbors who had been quietly watching from their windows or peering over fences murmured softly among themselves, the whispering like a gentle chorus acknowledging the inevitable consequences of years of unchecked behavior. Karen staggered backward, clutching at her chest, a raw combination of fear, anger, and helplessness overtaking her. The tears continued, but now they were mixed with screams of frustration and disbelief. This isn't fair. You're happy about this. Admit it." "You've been waiting for this moment." I shook my head slowly, remaining entirely calm, entirely untouchable. "No, Karen, I haven't been waiting. I've been patient. I've endured. And now the consequences are yours to bear. Nothing more, nothing less." She glared at me, her face red, her breathing ragged, but the fire that had once made her unstoppable, the fire of control, intimidation, and domination, had finally begun to burn itself out. In that moment, I realized that months of harassment, endless complaints, and constant attempts to undermine me had come to an abrupt and complete halt, not through confrontation or revenge, but simply through adherence to law, procedure, and patience. Karen's desperation was both spectacular and inevitable. Every fake apology, every sweet offering, every tearful plea was a reflection of her inability to face reality. She had spent years trying to control the narrative, to dominate the neighborhood, to bully anyone who dared question her authority. Now, for the first time, she had no leverage, no power, and no argument that could withstand the weight of verified facts. She sank slowly to the edge of her porch step, hands covering her face, sobs racking her body, a stark contrast to the commanding figure she had been for so long. The legal notices, fines, and verified survey documents had done what months of neighborly frustration could not. They had brought her to a reckoning. I walked back inside my house, letting her sobs and muttered curses fill the air for a few minutes, then closed the door gently behind me. Outside, Karen remained on the porch, her body shaking with a mixture of rage, despair, and exhaustion, finally confronting the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. I leaned against the closed door, quietly reflecting on the months of petty harassment, complaints, and intimidation, knowing that patience, facts, and law had triumphed over hysteria, entitlement, and desperation. Karen's attempts to manipulate, charm, and coerce had failed spectacularly, leaving only the raw consequences of her own actions. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, I knew that this chapter of her desperation and her undoing was far from over, but the most important victories had already been quietly won. After weeks of legal wrangling, fines, county notices, and mounting pressure from both the law and the neighborhood, Karen finally arrived at a grudging recognition of reality. The once unstoppable HOA queen, who had spent years dictating rules, intimidating neighbors, and manipulating outcomes in her favor, had been reduced to a state of reluctant negotiation. She approached my porch one late afternoon, face pale and drawn, the confident swagger of previous months replaced with a cautious, almost timid step. In her hands she carried a manila envelope, slightly crumpled, the weight of its contents clear from the way her fingers trembled around it. She knocked softly, almost hesitantly, and when I opened the door she avoided my eyes. "Adam," she said, her voice low, edged with defeat, I want to make a deal. I'll sign over the portion of my house that's on your land." Her words were barely more than a whisper, but the meaning was unmistakable. I regarded her carefully, noting the shift from arrogance to desperation. There was no theatrics this time, no fake smiles, no tears performed for effect. The legal reality had finally stripped her of the tools she had wielded so ruthlessly for years. I took the envelope from her cautiously, my fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment, a subtle reminder that the power balance had shifted. I didn't speak. Instead, I called my lawyer the next morning, inviting him over to review the documents carefully. He arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, eyes scanning over the paperwork with meticulous attention. He laid each page flat across my dining table, turning maps, boundary documents, and legal forms with practiced ease. "This is significant," he said finally, looking up at me, brow furrowed. "If executed properly, you'll legally own 48% of her home. That's nearly half. Additionally," he added, tapping on a line referencing the back taxes owed, "she will be liable for unpaid property taxes on the encroached portion. These are amounts she has not accounted for over years. The county can and will enforce collection." I nodded slowly, digesting the enormity of the situation. Months of harassment, petty complaints, boundary disputes, and intimidation had culminated in this singular, remarkable outcome. The survey she demanded, the letters she had feared, and the fines she had ignored had finally delivered me nearly half of the house that had caused so much chaos. I signed the documents carefully, one by one, making sure every form, every legal paragraph, every signature line was executed correctly. Karen watched silently, her expression taut, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her blouse. When the last signature was complete, the lawyer nodded, closing his briefcase. "Everything is in order. You now have a legal claim to her property, enforceable under county law." Karen's shoulders slumped, the weight of her own actions settling like a physical burden. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes, flowing freely now, unguarded and raw. She dabbed at them with a crumpled tissue, the reality of losing nearly half of her home finally crashing over her in waves. I can't believe this," she whispered, voice quivering, almost inaudible. "I worked so hard on that house. I didn't think it would come to this." I remained calm, composed, allowing her moment of realization to unfold. "Karen," I said gently, "the survey you demanded, the letters you ignored, and the county records you tried to dismiss, these have simply clarified the truth. Nothing more. You built across the boundary. The law confirms it. I haven't taken anything you didn't already owe, and now it's just officially recognized." She nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks, finally lowering her gaze. The bravado, the arrogance, the attempts to manipulate and intimidate, they were gone, replaced by a stunned recognition of the legal and social reality she had created through her own actions. I could see the mixture of shame, fear, and disbelief in her expression, and for the first time she seemed genuinely humbled. The neighborhood, which had watched this entire saga unfold from behind windows, across fences, and in whispered conversations, would later speak of this moment with awe. The survey she had demanded, the very tool she had wielded in a misguided attempt to intimidate me, had backfired spectacularly. It had given me ownership of a substantial portion of her property, validated by law, precise measurements, and official county records. Corinne's attempt at domination had collapsed under its own weight. I stepped back, allowing her to gather herself, and she finally turned to leave, her steps slower, heavier, weighed down by the consequences she had ignored for so long. As the door closed behind her, I reflected quietly on the months of challenges, harassment, and legal maneuvering that had led to this point. Justice, in its calm, unyielding way, had been served, not through confrontation or vengeance, but through adherence to facts, law, and patience. The envelope still rested on my table, a symbol of months of meticulous planning, careful documentation, and unwavering resolve. I looked at it, smiled faintly, and realized that sometimes the truth, when documented and validated, was the most powerful force of all. Corinne's cries and tears faded into the distance, leaving only the tangible proof of the outcome. Nearly half of her house, now officially and legally mine, a testament to patience, resilience, and the unyielding power of facts over arrogance. In the quiet of the evening, the neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively, whispers of amazement rippling through the community. A new chapter had begun, one where accountability, fairness, and truth had finally prevailed, and where the once untouchable HOA queen had learned, the hard way, that no amount of intimidation could alter legal reality. The deal was done. Corinne had signed. I had legally gained nearly half her home. The survey she demanded had been the instrument of her own undoing, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood could finally breathe, knowing that the scales of fairness had at last been restored. Corinne's world, once a carefully constructed fortress of control and intimidation, had crumbled entirely. Her reputation, which she had cultivated over decades of HOA dominance, was now in ruins. Neighbors who had once ducked at her sight or carefully nodded in fear now crossed the street or ducked inside their homes to avoid her, whispering quietly about the dramatic downfall of the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood. The HOA, eager to restore normalcy and stability, had replaced her with someone calm, measured, and competent, a person who understood rules but also fairness. Corinne, once at the helm, could now only watch as her authority evaporated, replaced by someone whose very presence reminded her of what she had lost. Her home, the pride of her life, had become a symbol of humiliation. Legal notices and surveys dictated that she had to either remodel portions of the house to retreat from my property, pay back fees and taxes she had accumulated unknowingly, or formally and permanently acknowledge my partial ownership. The reality was inescapable. Each day, Corinne would move through her home, knowing the truth. Every time she crossed the threshold into her living room, stepped into the garage, or even leaned against the walls of the encroached bedroom, she was standing on land that was now mine. The knowledge gnawed at her, an invisible weight pressing on her chest, a constant reminder of her mistakes. She began inspecting her home obsessively, measuring walls, floors, and corners, as if careful observation could somehow change the legal reality. Contractors were called in hesitantly, measuring tapes in hand, whispering among themselves about the unusual situation. Corinne barked instructions at them, but even their compliance carried the tension of uncertainty. Neighbors peeked occasionally, curiosity mingled with schadenfreude, observing the meticulous, frustrated woman trying to reclaim control over a property that had, in large part, legally slipped from her grasp. Social invitations dried up. The block parties she had once orchestrated with tight control and watchful eyes went on without her, laughter and conversation flowing freely in spaces she could no longer dominate. Corinne's phone buzzed incessantly, but mostly it was emails from lawyers, notifications about fees, and reminders of her responsibilities toward the property she partially no longer owned. Her attempts to regain social standing fell flat. The aura of authority she had wielded for so long had been replaced with quiet ridicule and whispered gossip. The mental toll was evident. She would stand by windows, gazing across the street at neighbors who now regarded her with cautious distance rather than fear. She walked through her own home with a heightened awareness of boundaries, the legal encroachment marking invisible lines across her floor and walls. Every step reminded her of the consequences of her arrogance and the cost of underestimating both the law and the patience of those she had harassed. Even small tasks became charged with tension. Sitting in the living room to read, Corinne would glance at the floor and imagine, with growing irritation, that I could claim the spot beneath her chair. Cooking in the kitchen, she would subconsciously measure distances, wondering if her refrigerator or counter might legally cross the border. She had transformed her own sanctuary into a prison of accountability. At night, the weight of the situation settled like a stone in her chest. She would lie awake, thinking back to the surveyor's words, the legal notices, and my calm, measured responses over the past months. Each recollection fueled a combination of anger, shame, and helplessness. She had built her life on control, authority, and intimidation, and now every one of her carefully maintained facades had been stripped away. The community, sensing the finality of her fall, began moving forward without her interference, organizing events, maintaining gardens, and resolving minor disputes without the shadow of her domination looming over every decision. Corinne was left isolated, forced to confront not only her legal obligations, but also the consequences of her behavior. Every room of her home a daily reminder that her actions had tangible, irreversible repercussions. She could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or assert dominance without encountering the cold, undeniable reality of law and fact. The survey she had demanded, once her tool of power, had become her undoing, and every inch of her house now carried the weight of that truth. Corinne had to navigate her life carefully, step by step, knowing that half of what she once claimed as entirely hers was legally mine. The quiet irony of it all was impossible to ignore. Each moment in her house was a constant acknowledgement of the failure of her schemes, the futility of her intimidation, and the inevitability of accountability. The lesson was inescapable. Arrogance, abuse of power, and disregard for truth eventually collided with reality, leaving even the most confident, controlling neighbor to reckon with consequences she could neither evade nor deny. The neighborhood settled into a calm it hadn't known in years, the tension that Corinne had instilled dissipating slowly like fog burned away by morning sun. The streets, once filled with whispered complaints and wary glances at every HOA decision, returned to a quiet rhythm of casual greetings, children playing freely, and neighbors exchanging smiles without fear of immediate reprisal. The new HOA president, a level-headed and fair-minded neighbor named Linda, took deliberate steps to restore trust and fairness to the community. In a private meeting, she approached me, eyes sincere, and said, "I want to apologize for everything Corinne put you through. The fines, the complaints, the intimidation, it was unacceptable. We're committed to making sure that the rules are applied fairly from now on." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement, the simple act of recognition for months of harassment that had weighed heavily on me. Even the surveyor, the neutral professional whose meticulous work had set the course for all that followed, stopped by casually one afternoon, leaning against the fence with a wry smile. "You know," he said, tapping his clipboard, "I've seen plenty of property disputes, but I've never witnessed anyone dig their own grave with a clipboard the way she did." I chuckled quietly, picturing Corinne's frantic inspection of maps, letters, and property lines, realizing that the instrument she had believed would secure her power had instead become the tool of her undoing. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Corinne herself had retreated into a quieter existence, her attempts to assert authority now tempered by the constant reminder of the legal reality she faced. Every corner of her home that rested on my property reminded her that arrogance, entitlement, and the misuse of rules had limits when faced with facts, patience, and proper legal procedure. Over time, she stopped attending HOA meetings, her voice absent from debates she once dominated. Neighbors noted the change with a mixture of relief and astonishment. The lessons she had learned were hard and visible, a combination of social isolation, financial accountability, and the humbling recognition that power misused rarely goes unpunished. For my part, life returned to its natural pace. The property boundaries were now clearly defined, the survey firmly establishing ownership, and the house itself became a shared reality, symbolic not of conflict but of the consequences of overreach. I could walk through my yard and across my portion of the boundary without fear of harassment or petty retaliation. The simple act of maintaining property became peaceful again, a quiet pleasure rather than a minefield of disputes. The county's involvement, the legal notices, and the survey had created a structure of accountability that everyone could see, a demonstration of how fairness and law could restore order. Karen, in her subdued state, provided a living reminder of the outcome of unchecked ambition and misuse of power, and the neighborhood collectively adjusted to the restored balance. Conversations returned to ordinary matters, gardens, local events, and shared concerns, without the constant interference and intimidation that had dominated the prior months. And so, in the calm after the storm, the community experienced a rare peace, one earned not through confrontation or vengeance, but through adherence to facts, patience, and the proper application of rules. Karen's lesson, though harsh, was clear. When you weaponize rules and power to dominate or destroy others, sometimes those same tools become the instruments of your own downfall. And all it had taken was the survey she insisted upon, a simple act she thought would secure control, yet ultimately clarified truth, enforced boundaries, and delivered justice quietly but unmistakably. Life, finally, could continue with order restored, accountability upheld, and a neighborhood once again able to breathe freely without fear, under the gentle, impartial guidance of law and fairness. The peace was earned, durable, and a permanent reminder that in the world of property, power, and community, truth is always the ultimate authority.